Marcus Ellis was a 38-year-old former Marine Corps sniper, a man who had served his country with distinction across some of the world's most dangerous battlefields. After nearly a decade of military service, he returned home to Nashville, Tennessee, hoping to find peace and rebuild a life with his family. Those early days back in Nashville were filled with quiet moments, sunlight filtering softly through the trees, familiar streets lined with friendly faces, and the warmth of home in a small suburban neighborhood. His house was modest, but welcoming, a place where the laughter of his children and the comfort of family dinners painted a picture of normalcy he'd longed for. One crisp April afternoon, Marcus was driving home from the public library, a book resting on the passenger seat beside him. The day was calm, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Birds sang in the branches overhead, and a gentle breeze whispered through the leaves. But just ahead, flashing red and blue lights pierced the calm like a sudden storm. A police cruiser pulled onto the side of the road. Marcus had no idea that this moment would change everything. The blaring sirens shattered the quiet, the sound cutting sharply through the neighborhood, an ominous warning that something was terribly wrong. Slowly, Marcus eased his car to the shoulder, complying without question. He couldn't have imagined what awaited him beyond that simple gesture. Within moments, a crowd of officers emerged, more than 50 in total, surrounding his vehicle. The sheer number was overwhelming, an unthinkable response to what appeared to be a routine stop. Marcus stood frozen, eyes wide with confusion and disbelief. In his mind, memories of combat flared, chaotic, dangerous, intense. Yet here he was on familiar streets, facing a force far more intimidating than any battlefield. Officers swiftly approached and handcuffed him, the cold metal cuffs locking tightly around his wrists. Despite his calm demeanor, a storm of emotions churned inside: fear, frustration, and a deep sense of injustice. He scanned their faces, searching for an explanation, something to justify the excessive show of force. Instead, all he saw were cold, disdainful looks, tinted with bias and assumption. In that moment, Marcus felt the crushing weight of unfairness. A decorated war veteran now treated like a criminal in his own hometown. This was the moment that marked the beginning of a story no one expected, one of brutality, racial injustice, and ultimately redemption and change. And from this moment forward, Marcus knew he was not fighting alone. There were allies waiting to step into his life, leaders ready to shift the course of events and spark a movement toward justice. That night on the streets of Nashville, peace was shattered. But from that darkness, a flicker of hope ignited a promise that justice would not be silent. Marcus Ellis, the soldier returned from war, was ready to fight a new battle, the battle for dignity and equality. Before we get started with today's story, drop a comment below telling us where you're tuning in from and what time it is there. It's great to see how far this story has traveled and who it's touched along the way. All right, let's jump right in. Marcus's evening had started just like any other. A quiet drive back from the local library, his mind calm and at ease. He had spent hours immersed in books, a brief escape from the chaos that sometimes felt like it loomed just beyond the city limits. Little did he know the calm of this ordinary night would soon be shattered in a way that would change his life forever. As Marcus turned onto a familiar street, flashing red and blue lights burst into view behind him. A police cruiser signaled him to pull over. He complied without hesitation, trusting that this was just a routine stop, a common occurrence for many drivers. But what followed was anything but routine. Almost immediately, the quiet street transformed into a chaotic scene. More police vehicles arrived one after another until nearly 50 officers had surrounded Marcus's car. The sheer scale of the response was staggering. Marcus stepped out of his vehicle, hands raised slightly in compliance, yet his heart pounded with confusion and fear. "Sir, you're being detained," barked a voice. The lead officer, Sergeant Daniel Price, a man known within the department for his short temper and controversial record, stepped forward. Price's gaze was hard, calculating. He barely glanced at Marcus before barking orders. "You're coming with us," Price said curtly. Marcus, calm but firm, asked quietly, "What's the reason?" Price ignored the question and motioned for other officers to move in. Before Marcus could react, hands grabbed him from every side. He was forced to the ground, his arms roughly twisted behind his back. Metal cuffs clicked tight around his wrists. The crowd of officers seemed overwhelming, each one moving with a kind of rehearsed aggression. Marcus tried to stay composed, but every moment felt like a battle, an invisible war waged not on distant fields, but on the very streets he called home. Passers-by stopped, their phones raised, capturing every second. Some shouted questions. Others looked on in stunned silence. One woman whispered, "This can't be happening." Marcus's voice was steady despite the chaos. "I'm a veteran," he said, trying to explain. "I served this country." But his words fell on deaf ears. The officers moved as if Marcus's identity meant nothing, that beneath his uniform and service lay a threat to be subdued. The situation escalated quickly. Sergeant Price's temper flared. His commands grew louder, more forceful. At one point, Marcus was slammed against the hood of a cruiser, pain radiating through his ribs. He winced but kept his silence, knowing any sign of resistance would only worsen things. The scene drew the attention of neighbors, some of whom hurried to record the unfolding event. A young man, Marcus's neighbor, managed to capture video footage that would soon ignite a firestorm far beyond their street. The camera showed Marcus handcuffed and clearly compliant, while officers spoke harshly, their tone laced with suspicion and disdain. This wasn't just about law enforcement, it was about power control and prejudice manifesting in real time. Later, when the video leaked online, it went viral almost immediately. Thousands shared it, their outrage growing as they saw the disproportionate show of force against a single man who had done nothing to justify it. Community leaders spoke out. Activists organized protests. The media descended on Nashville demanding answers. For Marcus, the night was the beginning of a long fight, not just for his own dignity, but for the recognition of a deeper systemic injustice. In his quiet moments afterward, he would replay the scene over and over, not because he doubted what happened, but because he struggled to understand how a man who had fought for his country could be treated as a criminal in his own home. His resolve hardened. He knew that this night was more than a personal trauma. It was a reflection of a larger problem, one that demanded change. Marcus Ellis was no longer just a veteran coming home. He had become a symbol, an unwilling witness to a broken system. And with that, his battle truly began. Sergeant Daniel Price was no stranger to controversy. At 34 years old, he had been a part of the Nashville Police Department for nearly a decade. His record was peppered with complaints, 6 formal allegations of misconduct, including excessive use of force and racial bias. Yet remarkably, none of these complaints ever led to serious disciplinary action. Price was known among colleagues as a hothead, quick to anger, prone to escalate situations rather than diffuse them. But within the department, he was also protected by an unspoken code of silence, shielded by superiors who prioritized loyalty over accountability. In community circles, Price was a figure of intimidation. Residents in predominantly black neighborhoods whispered stories of his heavy-handed tactics, a reputation that preceded him. Yet when questioned by outsiders, the department often painted him as a dedicated officer, a man who got the job done. This dual image was emblematic of a larger problem, a system that often rewarded aggression and overlooked abuse. Price's behavior was not an isolated failure, but a symptom of institutional flaws. Officers like him were hired, trained, and promoted within a culture that tacitly accepted prejudice and violence as tools of policing. Behind closed doors, Price's supervisors received reports about his temper and biases, but investigations were perfunctory and consequences minimal. This lack of accountability emboldened him to act with impunity. The night Marcus Ellis was stopped, Sergeant Price's attitudes and past actions directly influenced how he handled the encounter. Rather than seeking calm or clarity, Price approached Marcus with suspicion and hostility, interpreting his presence as a threat rather than recognizing him as a decorated veteran. During the arrest, Price's commands were sharp and demeaning. He ignored Marcus's calm explanations in attempts to comply, seeing instead a man to dominate and control. This dynamic set the tone for the entire incident, an abuse of power wrapped in prejudice. Price's personal flaws were magnified by the system's failure to intervene. His unchecked aggression reflected an environment that tolerated, if not encouraged, such behavior. When fellow officers hesitated or questioned his tactics, they were often silenced or ostracized. The culture of silence protected Price and others like him, allowing abuses to persist unchecked. Even as community outrage grew following the viral video, some in the department remained defensive, unwilling to confront the root causes. Price's story therefore became a symbol not just of one man's misconduct, but of the urgent need for systemic reform. Understanding Sergeant Daniel Price's role was crucial to grasping the full scope of the injustice Marcus faced. It wasn't merely a bad day or a single mistake. It was the culmination of a flawed culture, poor leadership, and institutional neglect. This realization set the stage for a broader conversation, one that questioned the very foundations of policing and demanded accountability beyond the individual. As the investigation unfolded, the focus would shift from Marcus's arrest to the culture that allowed officers like Price to operate without consequence. And it was here in this reckoning that the true battle for justice began. The moment Marcus's car slowed to a stop on the side of the road, an uneasy silence filled the air. He glanced into his rearview mirror, the flashing police lights reflected back at him in a relentless strobe. His heart beat steadily, but with a mounting sense of tension. For a man who had faced the chaos of war, this moment felt strangely disorienting, an unexpected battle right on the streets he once called home. Marcus stepped out of his vehicle as instructed, hands slightly raised to show he meant no harm. But the calm he hoped for evaporated instantly. Hands behind your back. One officer ordered, voice sharp and uncompromising. Confused, Marcus tried to ask why, but the words were cut off by the rough grip of hands on his arms. Cold metal cuffs snapped around his wrists, biting into his skin. The sensation was stark and humiliating. A man who had wielded a rifle with precision was now restrained like a common criminal. His mind raced. Why is this happening? What did I do wrong? But no answers came. Instead, the officers around him acted with an urgency and aggression that felt disproportionate, almost rehearsed. Marcus's pulse quickened not with fear, but with a deep simmering frustration. He had trained himself to control his emotions on the battlefield, to stay calm under pressure. Yet here in his hometown, that control was tested in a new way. He felt the weight of judgment in their eyes, the silent assumptions that spoke louder than any words. "You think you're better than us," one officer sneered under his breath, loud enough for Marcus to hear. Marcus's throat tightened. He remembered the countless hours of discipline, the sacrifices made in far-off lands to protect freedoms. Now that very freedom seemed stripped away in an instant. Despite the rough treatment, Marcus held himself steady. He refused to lash out. Instead, he focused on the breathing, on holding on to the dignity he felt slipping through his fingers. As the officers prepared to escort him away, a crowd had begun to gather, neighbors, passers-by, some with phones out recording every moment. In that crowd, Marcus caught a few sympathetic looks, but mostly confusion and fear. He realized then that this incident was bigger than just him. It was about power and control. It was about a system that saw him not as a hero, but as a threat. The moment stretched long, filled with tension and unspoken questions. Marcus's voice, calm but resolute, finally broke the silence. "I serve this country," he said, his eyes meeting Sergeant Price's. "I deserve respect." But the response was a cold, dismissive glance. That was the beginning of a confrontation, not just between a man and the police, but between two worlds, one defined by service and sacrifice, the other by suspicion and prejudice. In that fraught exchange, the seeds of a larger story were planted, one that would soon reach far beyond the streets of Nashville, stirring conversations about justice, equality, and human dignity. For Marcus, these first moments of conflict marked the start of a fight for more than just his freedom. They were the start of a fight for his very identity. The street where Marcus was detained was quiet for most of the day. But as the confrontation unfolded, it quickly became clear that what was happening was no ordinary traffic stop. From nearby houses and sidewalks, neighbors cautiously emerged, drawn by the commotion. Their eyes wide with disbelief, they watched as a group of officers surrounded Marcus with an intensity that seemed more suited to a dangerous criminal than a returning veteran. Among them was Lisa Turner, a local school teacher who had stepped outside to walk her dog. She pulled out her phone, instinctively recording what she saw. Her hands trembled slightly as she zoomed in on the scene, the rough handling, the way Marcus's hands were cuffed tightly behind his back despite his calm compliance. Lisa's video would become the first spark of a wildfire. Others soon joined in, phones raised high, capturing the unfolding drama from different angles. A nearby shop owner, a young college student passing by, even a delivery driver, all documented the moment in real time. These videos spread fast, their images raw and unfiltered. Viewers across the city and soon across the country watched in shock as Marcus's treatment was exposed to the light. The footage showed a man who had served his country being subdued not with respect, but with suspicion and force. The video went viral within hours. Hashtags demanding justice for Marcus started trending. In online communities, debates ignited. People expressed outrage, disbelief, and fear. Why had so many officers responded with such force? Why was Marcus treated as a threat when he posed none? Social media became a megaphone for voices long silenced. Activists shared the video widely, connecting it to a broader pattern of systemic abuse against Black Americans. The footage became undeniable evidence, a challenge to the official narrative that often downplayed or justified excessive force. For the first time, many could see the truth as it happened, not through filtered reports or secondhand stories, but directly with their own eyes. The power of the video changed the story from a local incident into a national conversation about race policing and justice. But for Marcus, the impact of those witnesses went deeper. He felt seen not just by cameras, but by a community awakening to the realities he faced. Lisa and others who recorded the event would later testify their presence vital in the fight for accountability. Without those voices from the shadows, the story might have been buried, lost to silence, and forgotten by the system. Instead, it became a beacon, a reminder that sometimes justice begins with someone simply choosing to pay attention. And with every share, every retweet, the demand for change grew louder. Marcus's story was no longer his alone. It belonged to every witness, every supporter, every person who believed that no one should be treated unfairly under the law. In the age of smartphones and social media, the truth could no longer be hidden. And that truth would shake the foundations of a system in desperate need of reform. The moment the video of Marcus Ellis's arrest began to circulate widely, a powerful dialogue erupted across social media, news outlets, and community forums. People from all walks of life were confronted with a stark truth: a decorated Marine veteran had been subdued, restrained, and humiliated in a way that echoed far too many stories before his. At the core of this unfolding drama lay a painful reality: the intersection of power and prejudice. The police officers tasked with upholding the law wielded their authority in a manner that revealed deep-seated biases. Marcus was not just a man being arrested. He was a Black man carrying the invisible weight of centuries of racial profiling and discrimination. The handcuffs that bound Marcus were more than just physical restraints. They symbolized a system that too often treats Black Americans as suspects, first citizens second. Experts and activists quickly drew parallels between Marcus's experience and historic incidents that had shocked the nation: George Floyd's tragic death under a Minneapolis officer's knee, Sandra Bland's arrest and mysterious passing in a Texas jail cell, Eric Garner's last words echoing, "I can't breathe," in Staten Island, and too many others whose stories had stirred outrage but little systemic change. These cases, like Marcus's, shared a pattern: excessive force, disregard for human dignity, and an alarming frequency of police officers escaping meaningful accountability. Sociologists explained how implicit bias operates within law enforcement, the unconscious attitudes and stereotypes that influence behavior and decision-making without awareness. This bias creates a dangerous lens through which officers view people of color, often assuming guilt or threat where none exists. Legal analysts pointed out that these incidents are not just personal failures, but symptoms of a deeply flawed system. The structure of policing, recruitment, training, and culture often enables or even encourages aggressive tactics disproportionately applied to Black communities. In Marcus's case, his military service and calm demeanor did little to shield him from suspicion. Instead, his very presence was seen through a prism of prejudice, casting him as dangerous rather than respected. This is where power meets prejudice. Those entrusted with authority sometimes wield it not as protectors, but as enforcers of outdated and unjust social hierarchies. The video served as irrefutable evidence of this clash, revealing how systemic racism can manifest in the most routine interactions. Communities across the country rallied around Marcus's story, demanding reforms that would address these deep-rooted issues. They called for mandatory bias training, independent oversight of police misconduct, and changes to the use of force policies that allow such brutality to persist. The fight was no longer just about Marcus. It was about dismantling the structural barriers that enable these injustices. And while progress was slow, the collective voices grew louder, fueled by stories like Marcus's that could no longer be ignored or dismissed. Power without accountability becomes tyranny. Prejudice without intervention becomes injustice. The arrest of Marcus Ellis was a vivid reminder of the urgent need to realign policing with the principles of fairness, respect, and humanity. It was a call to action, not only for law enforcement agencies, but for society as a whole. Because until power is checked by conscience and authority tempered by equality, the cycle of injustice will continue to claim more victims. Marcus's story was one among many, but it stood as a beacon of awareness, a moment when power's abuse was laid bare, demanding a new path forward. The day of the trial dawned with a heavy silence hanging over Nashville, as if the city itself was holding its breath. In the courthouse, the air was thick with anticipation and tension, each person present acutely aware that this case was about far more than just one man's experience. Marcus Ellis sat quietly in the courtroom, his posture composed but his mind racing. Beside him, his legal team prepared meticulously, lawyers determined to hold those responsible accountable and armed with evidence, witness statements, and the powerful video footage that had captured the nation's attention. Leading the charge was attorney Rachel Bennett, a seasoned civil rights lawyer with a reputation for fierce advocacy and unyielding dedication to justice. Rachel had spent years fighting similar cases, standing up against systemic abuse, and shining light on stories the powerful tried to bury. Her calm demeanor masked a fierce resolve that Marcus found both comforting and inspiring. Opposing them was the city's legal defense team, experienced and well-funded, determined to protect the police department and minimize the damage to its reputation. At the heart of the prosecution's case was the video, the raw, unedited footage showing the disproportionate force used against Marcus. Rachel Bennett's opening statement was measured but pointed, emphasizing the broader implications of the case. "This is not simply about one incident," she declared. "It's about a pattern of conduct, a culture within law enforcement that too often disregards the rights and dignity of Black citizens." Marcus Ellis was not just a victim of one bad encounter. He was a symbol of systemic failure. The courtroom listened intently, the weight of her words resonating beyond the walls. Sergeant Daniel Price, the lead officer, sat stoic on the stand guarded by his legal team. His demeanor was defensive, his answers often clipped and evasive. When confronted with the video evidence, Price maintained that his actions were justified by officers' safety concerns, painting Marcus as a suspicious individual who had resisted arrest. But witnesses from the community, including those who filmed the event, testified to Marcus's compliance and calm demeanor. Neighbors recounted the shock they felt watching a decorated veteran treated like a criminal in their neighborhood. The courtroom drama unfolded with every piece of testimony and cross-examination revealing not only the events of that night, but the underlying tensions between law enforcement and the communities they serve. At times, the atmosphere grew heated. Marcus's family sat in the gallery, holding hands tightly, their faces a mix of hope and apprehension. Outside the courthouse, supporters gathered their presence, a silent but powerful reminder that justice was being watched by many. The case stirred intense debate nationwide, fueling conversations about police reform and racial justice. Inside the courtroom, Marcus felt the burden of being at the center of this storm, but also the strength of knowing his voice was finally being heard. The trial was not just a legal battle, it was a confrontation between two visions of justice, one rooted in accountability and change, the other in denial and preservation of the status quo. As the proceedings continued, the stakes grew higher, the future uncertain. But for Marcus and his team, every moment it was a step towards shining a light on truth, demanding that power be held to account. And for the nation watching, it was a reminder that justice requires courage, not just from victims, but from all who stand to defend it. The courtroom buzzed with tension as the trial unfolded. Witness after witness recounted the events of that night, painting a picture of a man wrongfully treated and a system desperately in need of reform. Just as the case seemed to be grinding through the predictable motions of legal argument, A new figure entered the scene, one who would change the entire dynamic of the courtroom. General Robert Langston, a four-star general in the United States Marine Corps, strode confidently into the packed courtroom. His presence commanded attention. A man of towering stature and undeniable respect, whose reputation extended far beyond military circles. Langston was no stranger to hardship. He had led troops in some of the most intense conflicts overseas, making tough decisions under immense pressure. His decorated career was a testament to discipline, honor, and an unwavering commitment to justice. But today his mission was different. Taking the stand, General Langston's voice carried a weight that silenced the room. Marcus Ellis is one of our own. He began his tone steady but filled with emotion. He served this country with distinction and honor. What happened to him here on home soil is unacceptable. The general's eyes scanned the courtroom, locking briefly with Marcus's, a silent message of solidarity and respect passing between them. On behalf of the Marine Corps and as a citizen of this nation, Langston continued, I stand here to apologize for the injustice Marcus has suffered. No one who has served should be treated with such disregard. The courtroom gasped. For many, it was a moment of profound significance, a military leader publicly acknowledging the wrongs done not only to Marcus, but symbolically to all veterans and Black Americans. Langston's testimony went beyond mere words. He detailed the values that every Marine is sworn to uphold: integrity, respect, and courage. He contrasted these ideals sharply with the actions of the officers involved in Marcus's arrest. I have seen what true leadership looks like, Langston said. I have seen what it means to protect and serve with honor. And I have seen the damage caused when those values are abandoned. His speech resonated deeply, shining a spotlight on the chasm between the military's principles and the troubling realities of policing in America. General Langston's presence shifted the trial's atmosphere. Where once there was skepticism and resistance, now there was a growing acknowledgement of the need for change. The defense team, for all their efforts, found themselves facing not only legal arguments, but the undeniable moral weight of Langston's words. Marcus's family wept quietly, their hope rekindled by this unexpected ally. For Marcus, the general's apology was more than symbolic. It was a validation of his humanity, his service, and his right to justice. Outside the courtroom, news of General Langston's testimony spread quickly, sparking renewed calls for police reform and accountability. Veterans groups, civil rights organizations, and everyday citizens rallied together, united by a common demand for respect and equality. In that moment, Marcus Ellis was no longer just a victim. He became a symbol of resilience, a beacon of hope for those who believed that justice could prevail against the odds. General Langston's unexpected appearance reminded everyone that sometimes allies come from the most powerful places and their voices can make all the difference. As the trial pressed on, the echoes of his words continued to inspire the fight for change inside the courtroom, across the city, and throughout the nation. General Robert Langston's presence in the courtroom carried with it more than just his personal reputation. It brought the weight of history. In the United States military, a four-star general is among the highest ranks attainable, a position earned through decades of sacrifice, leadership, and unwavering dedication. Langston's career was marked by countless acts of valor and service, a legacy intertwined with the very ideals America prides itself on: honor, duty, and justice. For the Black community, his appearance transcended the courtroom drama. It became a symbol of recognition and respect long overdue. In a society where many Black veterans face both overt discrimination and subtle marginalization, having a figure like General Langston openly apologize for the injustice Marcus Ellis endured was powerful and deeply meaningful. Langston's words echoed the voices of countless soldiers who fought for freedom abroad, only to return home to a country where equality remained elusive. His apology was not merely a gesture. It was a public acknowledgement that the systemic failures in law enforcement were not abstract problems, but personal betrayals of those who served their nation with honor. By standing with Marcus, Langston bridged a divide between military and civilian life, between authority and accountability, between history and the present day. The act of a high-ranking military officer apologizing to a Black man wrongfully arrested sent a ripple through the collective consciousness of the nation. It forced many to confront uncomfortable truths about race, power, and the justice system. It challenged long-held assumptions and demanded a re-examination of the values America claims to uphold. For the community of Nashville, especially its black residents, General Langston's testimony was a moment of validation. It signaled that their experiences mattered, that their calls for justice were being heard at the highest levels. Langston's presence also placed pressure on the police department and local government. It underscored that the issues at stake were not just individual misconduct, but institutional accountability. His public apology was a call for systemic change, a demand that the ideals of service, respect, and justice be reflected not just in military ranks, but in every corner of American society. In this moment, Marcus Ellis was no longer just a man seeking justice for himself. He was a catalyst for dialogue, a symbol of hope, and a reminder that history is made by those who dare to speak truth to power. General Langston's courage to stand before the court and admit the wrongs done helped shift the narrative from accusation to action. It showed that even in institutions steeped in tradition and hierarchy, there is room for accountability, growth, and reconciliation. The weight of history bore down on the courtroom that day, but it also lifted up the promise of a more just future one, where respect and dignity are afforded to all, regardless of race or background. And for Marcus, this was more than a trial. It was a pivotal chapter in a lifelong struggle for equality, honor, and recognition, one that would inspire others to continue the fight long after the gavel fell. The courtroom's heavy silence gave way to a broader examination, one that reached beyond the individual actions of Sergeant Daniel Price or the specifics of Marcus Ellis's case. This was a trial not only of a man, but of a system, one fraught with deep-seated flaws, blind spots, and a culture of protectionism that shielded wrongdoing from scrutiny. The Nashville Police Department, like many law enforcement agencies across the country, had long wrestled with allegations of excessive force, racial bias, and misconduct. Yet time and again, investigations seemed to stall punishments,